Why am I mentioning the fact that he's Caucasian? The reason I'm mentioning this is because the doctrine we see that we learn today here in America, in the Western world, primarily came from Caucasians. All right? And that's why that's the reason we show the origin. Let me put this here. That's why we show the origin of the people that came up with certain ideas. It's important we know that. Okay? And it's amazing, while this new-founded doctrine was being pushed in the earth, right? What was going on with the people in America during that time, the early 1800s? Anybody?
Slavery.
Huh?
Slavery.
What?
Slavery.
What?
Slavery.
Slavery. Slavery. History. Slavery. So the same time the earth was being subdued by the Western world, and the Western world ideologies were being pushed all through the earth, they were also coming up with new ideas when it comes to the doctrine of Christ. All right? Now we're going to show you what most or all of Christians believed before J.N. Darby, and we're going to show you what was introduced after that. Okay? Primarily the conservative Protestants today are the bearers or holders of this doctrine. All right? The Protestants broke off from the Roman Catholic Church, but still, they're still one, even though they make everyone think that they're separate. Okay? It was still a Western doctrine coming from the Western world to subdue the earth. So during that very dark period for slaves, okay, they were pushing an ideology that would eventually seep into the children, whom would one day be left free or set free. All right? Now, let me show you on this chart here, if you don't mind. All right? And we're going to prove everything we're saying here. You had Christ, who was crucified, right? At the age of 33. All right? Before J.N. Darby, it was known that after Christ's crucifixion, that Satan would come and attack the woman that bare the man-child in Revelation the 12th chapter. So the spirit that was in Rome, or the Romans, would come down on God's people, which was called the tribulation period. A lot of things happened after Christ was crucified. The disciples were martyred. The Jews' last stand happened. That was tribulation. That was pain. That was suffering that came on God's people. So before J.N. Darby, it was understood that the tribulation period would happen to God's people until he come back. That God's people, Israel, would be punished until the second coming, until Christ lead them out of their tribulation. All right? Now, J.N. Darby came up with another idea. His idea was, instead of it being a tribulation period between Christ and the second coming, which everyone, all the historians, the biblical scholars, understand that God's people were scattered throughout the earth, went through much pain and suffering right after Christ. This guy came up with dispensationalism, to tell you that you have to break this period from Christ and his coming into dispensation periods. Okay? He was teaching, or they started to believe, that after Christ was crucified, right, then there will be a rapture at a certain period. Right? Christ would come back, rapture up what they call today the church. This is what they teach now. And those that are saved with this rapture, meeting Christ in the air, will not deal with the pain and suffering and the mark of the beast that will be introduced by the Antichrist. Right? And when the Antichrist come on the scene, he will do all these miracles and evil works. And for 7 years, during this tribulation period, he will introduce a spending system or a chip that if anyone get this, will be tormented. And then after that, Christ will give peace for 1,000 years for those that rejected the mark. You understand? And those that followed him. He put a dispensation in it. When really, before J.N. Darby came on the scene, before J.N. Darby, right? Before J.N. Darby, it was commonly known that there was no dispensation. That Christ was crucified, his people would go through tribulation, and then after that, the second coming. Right? So, why would they try to put dispensations in between this tribulation period? We're going to show you today. Alright? Now, this wasn't good enough. This was not good enough. Now, they planted the dispensation seed or the left behind seed in the 1800s. But they continued it through doctrine. And mind you, in the beginning, that same doctrine that they were pushing, that J.N. Darby was pushing, was actually rejected by the Catholic Church at one time. They were rejecting it, calling it a heresy teaching, because it was commonly known that the tribulation would happen to God's people until the second coming. Now, I'm going to show you how they tricked the people into believing this. The tribulation happened to God's people in 70 AD, which are the children of Israel. So the church, or the modern day Christian church, which came over here from Europe, switched it into making you think that the tribulation is not on the children of Israel, but that tribulation is on the church. So they did a play of words. So now, instead of you identifying who the tribulation is actually happening to, you understand? Yes. People are not even looking at the people that are going through tribulation. Now they attribute Israel to the church. That happened over here. That's new doctrine. So that wasn't enough. So they had to use a form of propaganda. Because the Bible itself could not back up the teaching of Left Behind and could not back up the teaching of dispensationalism as well as they wanted it to. Because any learned man can clearly see, any learned man or woman could see that there's holes in that doctrine. So what they did, they got all the pastors together, all the known evangelists, which have political status in this earth. They did this in the mid-80s, between the mid-80s and the mid-90s. And they started pushing a left behind doctrine. I don't know, everybody know about this. Left behind. So this was a form of propaganda. And see, what most people don't understand or don't try to fathom, that even the authors of the Left Behind books will tell you that this was fiction. This is fiction.